Okay, well, having played Stonewall, there's another game from that initial set of my, I guess, I only have 6 of them left because I gave my Napoleon at Waterloo away and never reobtained a copy, and I'm okay with that. Anyway, this game is actually, this was a magazine version. It came in with 2 games, Eylau and Dresden. I'm going to do a video for an introduction. I can show you the Dresden map as well. I don't have the counters out. These were all attached to one another when it was first, when it came out of the magazine, and I cut them, gasp, so that I could have, a smaller, non-poochy map, or conceivably be able to play 2 games at once. If I had brought both of these to a gaming session, which I did it at one time, we could set one up for 2 players and another up for another 2 players. Although actually we ended up playing Dresden as a 4-player game instead of doing that for whatever reason. Just, because nobody else knew the rules at all and nobody else was used to war games. Okay, so this is a really, really simple game. This is the Napoleon at Waterloo's design applied to a couple other battles with a few little complexities, but not much. In fact, like some of the Avalon Hill classics, it's at the very edge of, is this, can you even consider this a war game? Is it a simulation or not? In the sense of the Avalon Hill ones, I'd say they definitely were, because at the time that they came out, nobody had a better idea how to simulate. Nobody had more depth. The thinking hadn't really been done largely, except maybe a little bit in the minis side of things. And especially for operational level games, which this almost feels like, although it's supposed to represent a battle. Well, how do you represent that? I mean, minis didn't do that, really. They could handle this. Okay. Anyway, what you end up having is a very, very stripped down, basic war game, which is an excellent entry point to teach you some of the basic principles of wargaming as they had kind of grown by 1970, or in this case, I think we're talking more like 77, 78, probably later, towards the later end, 78, 79. I don't know, that can't be possible. Anyway, I'll look up the date on this sucker. But this one looks like a few other S&T games and almost all the Ares games. Very much designed to speak in a different way, with these bold, headings that explain some of the rule, and not quite at the same numerical level. So, they're trying to reach out to newer gamers with these. I never found them as pleasant, actually. I found them harder to read because of this bolding and everything. But probably the kind of people who like the full color rule sets of today would actually appreciate these more, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, there's not a lot here. Let's look at the base sequence of play to the game, as well as a little bit with the units. The units are pretty standard. You have a combat factor here on the left-hand side, a movement factor. You have a divisional affiliation. And those are going to match with these fresh strength markers. This is, where the system gets a little bit beyond the straight Napoleon at Waterloo system, right? And then there's a couple other things. There's divisional integrity and stuff like that, which I think didn't make it into the original. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Okay, so on your turn, you move and you fight. And then the other guy moves and he fights. That's it. It's really that simple. Movement is based on your movement rates, point value. You have a terrain effects chart that tells you how much it costs to move into every kind of hex. So a clear hex is 1, woods is 2, and you count your movement. Zone of controls exist in this game. They're fixed. What I mean by that, in case you're a new gamer, new to war games of the hex and counter variety for whatever reason, and are looking at, I don't know, an ancient Napoleon. In the history of wargaming, this is pretty far back, but not maybe the absolute classic. So I don't know why you'd end up here, except maybe I sent you here. But anyway, what you've got is this idea of zones of control, which is something you're going to see throughout most of the traditional war games, which is every hex adjacent to a unit in some way or another prevents the enemy from moving through it. In this game, it's you move into a zone of control, you stop. You can't leave a zone of control except, let me make sure of this, you can't move from one to another, but I'm not sure if you can leave one at all in this game. You may just have to fight your way out of it. That's kind of rare. Most games allow you to move through them, move out of them eventually, just not directly from one to another. Yes, you are allowed to leave. Oh no, a unit may not move as so long as it's in an enemy-controlled hex. Yeah, I was right. So the only way to get out of a zone of control in this system is to fight your way out of it. In most games, you can withdraw back. So if, assume these were French units, which they're not, the Russians could pull back out of there as long as they don't try to push through another, through a pair of zones. So for example, here, they couldn't move from this zone to this zone in most of the games. But in this game, they're absolutely rigid. You cannot leave them. You must fight your way through, and you can keep throwing more troops in. Okay, so that's kind of an interesting aspect of it. Now, when you fight, in general, you have to be adjacent to other units. And now here's where it's kind of tricky. If you're fighting, if you're in a position like this, you can attack both of these units. In fact, you must attack both of them if you attack. Now, let's see. A unit that is in an enemy zone of control must attack, and so in this game, you must always attack if you're in a zone of control. But now, if I'm in this position, this guy attacks this. This guy has to attack that. They can't combine against this because this one must be attacked. Every unit must be attacked, and every unit that's adjacent to enemy units must attack. Now let's take a look at another position. Let's say it's this one. Well, now I must attack here, I must attack here, but this guy has to choose one or the other to throw his strength in. Like a lot of games, this is going to use an odds chart. And it's not in great shape, but my rolls. But the odds chart is back here. And what you do is you divide the strength of the attacker by the strength of the defender and come up with a simple odds ratio. So for example, here if I have 8 to 2 for strength, that would be 4 to 1 because 2 goes into 8 4 times. Great. That's easy enough. And here I also have 4 to 1. Again, easy enough. But what if I have 5 attacking 3? What is that? Well, you round down to the nearest number that works fully. So 5 divided by 3 goes in 1 and something times. That would be 1 to 1 odds. Good enough. And you always round in favor of the defender in this game. And that's a pretty common policy throughout most war games. All right. And yes, I'm not going to do this in many war games, but this is such an introductory game that if you're looking at this, it may be because you want to get into war games and you don't want to start off, I don't know, with whatever the modern fancy is, because that probably isn't going to build you up towards some of the things like the operational combat system quite as easily as something like this will. Okay, so when you actually handle the combat, you're just going to roll a die on this chart, and you get a result. And the results are either AR, which is attacker retreat, DR, defender retreat, or eliminations, attacker eliminated, defender eliminated, or something equal elimination. So now, if you retreat, you're going to fall back a certain number of hexes. And let's see how this is actually specified. You know, I don't bother reading the rules to some of these because it's so easy. I just look it up when I have to see it. Because once you get the idea of these games, you don't really have to you don't have to read the rules every time. So now a retreat, I don't know. It's just 1 hex away, and you can't go into a zone of control. You can't there's no stacking in this game, so you can't retreat into a hex with another unit, although there may be. There is a displacement rule in this game, which means that if you retreat into where there's a friendly unit, you can force it to retreat in turn. And as long as all those retreats are legitimate, you can end up making the retreat into that hex and pushing all those units back. But only if that's necessary. All right. For eliminated, well, the entire group of units that was throwing its strength points into that die roll. So here there'd be 2 die rolls, right? One against this unit, one against that unit. The entire force that was throwing its strength point into one die roll would be destroyed, either the attacker or defender, depending on the results. On an equal elimination, the smaller side takes a full loss, and the other side has to take a loss equal to the loss of the smaller side. Okay. So there's a little bit of, it's kind of difficult to explain what's going on here with, well, every unit must be attacked and every unit must attack an enemy unit, and you have to throw units in and la la la. And some games have soak-off rules, I don't know if this one does, but where you could make an attack at less than the minimum odds on the game and just be eliminated in exchange for that. That's not going to happen very often with the numbers in this, but it's possible. So let's see if there is a requirement. Yep, it looks like you're completely allowed to attack at a lower value, at a low value with a unit. So for example, if I had one unit, if I had a situation more like this, and I'm going to have to, I don't know. Let me just put it back. Here's something kind of cool about this game. It's got little numbers on the back of each counter because SPI had started double-sided printing by this point, and they were used to doing that, but they didn't need 2 sides for this game. This game just does not need that the complexity of a second side. So they put the setup hex on the other side. And that, you won't see too many games with that, but there are a few that are fairly simple that came during a period. Avalon Hill, for example, didn't tend to double side their counters in the same era. In a later era, I think they started doing it more often. Okay. So, where are we? Yeah. The soak-off attack, you could make an attack at very low odds, below the edge of the table, so that other units could conglomerate against one that they have to attack. And you just end up rolling on that very low table. That's all that happens in this game. In some games, that's not even legitimate. You have to make it to the table if it's going to count as an attack. Okay. One other thing I didn't mention is terrain effects on combat. Depending on the terrain the defender's sitting in, it can have some effect. So for example, a slope hex side, if you're attacked exclusively through slopes, like if you're on this hilltop and being attacked, you get a bonus. In this case, you're doubled. That's just a little added piece to how these kind of simple games handle the terrain on the board, which is really what you're maneuvering about and fighting for, because if you were on a clear plane just fighting with these counters, it would all be rather bland and maybe not there wouldn't be too many opportunities for tactical thought. Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There's something else on combat I didn't mention, which is these artillery units, and they're kind of special in this system because if they're not next to an enemy unit, but they're 2 away from one, they can fire into a combat that they're 2 away from, that there's an intervening hex. So like this could throw itself into either attack there, if the Russians were attacking. In fact, if we were in this position and the Russians were attacking the French, this Russian unit could attack these 2, and this is your soak-off. That's below the 1 to 6, so that this one could attack with the support of the artillery at 1 to 1 on this one. And there you'd have a 1 to 8 odds and a 1 to 1 odds. Now the 1 to 8 odds is very bad. This guy's sacrificing himself, essentially. I'm going to have a hard time putting all my counters back because I don't remember where they all go. That was the initial setup of the game that we saw there. Okay, let's look at some other things here, and then I'll touch the specific rules that are additions to allow at the beginning of the allow scenario, because there's two scenarios here that are a little different, and I want to cover the basic rules in a way that can help people who are new to wargaming more than anything else pick up a game along these lines. Okay, so what else do we have here? After combat? Okay. So there's reinforcements, which is units coming back on the board. And we've got little units placed here on the turn record chart. And these are going to come in. They list a hex, which is lettered on the board. So B would be over here. And they're going to come in on turn 4, this stack. It's just a stack of units. And in this game, basically, in most games, you count this as your first hex of movement. In this game, let's see if there's a little bit of difference there. No, there isn't. They can just enter there however they like on that time, at that time. And you can delay them off the board for a while. They're allowed to deploy a little away from here if there's enemy units near there. They can kind of deploy in, combat formation instead of charging down the road. Now, in some games, they require that one unit follow the other, as if they were traveling in a line. That's not the case in this game. In this game, you're allowed to just surge out with everything. A little unrealistic, but hey, whatever. Okay, that's about it for this game. It really is. There's going to be different victory point conditions for a game, usually involving killing the enemy units, etc. A game like this is a good first step before you go to something like the game I just covered, Stonewall. I definitely would have been better off if I had started with this first, I think. And in fact, I kind of played Stonewall, didn't get it, and then came to this, played this, came back and said, I get Stonewall. But the kind of ideas that, tactically, really, it's hard to tell it's hard to call it either tactical or strategic thinking, but there's a certain tactical patterns that you start seeing because of the hex grid and the way the zones of control work that are helpful things to know between, from game to game. So for example, having units every other space tends to be an efficient and effective use of your units. And quite often it's actually better than having a straight line of units if you could have stronger pools of units or a longer line or whatever with the holes in it. I don't know how much that's true in this game, to tell you the truth, because there's no stacking or anything, so your density is really going to be a straight solid line of units. Those are kind of weird gamey mechanisms that come with the terrain. It's just part of the hex encounter type game. Anyway, I'm going to come back with specifics for allow, and there's a few little rules here. And actually, there's specifics for this game, which is night game turns, which will apply to both scenarios. Now, this is just something that really is just this game, as opposed to something that you can carry in all others. But basically, in the night game turn, you can't enter an enemy zone of control, and there's not going to be any combat.